Hi, Year 7, it's Mr. Ratcliffe. You've come to your last instrumental family of the orchestra. So, having done percussion, brass, and woodwind, we're now on the strings family. And again, I've got some really good videos for you showing you how the 5 main string instruments work. The first video is by one of our Perry teachers, Miss Douglas, who's going to show you the violin and the viola.
Hi, I'm going to be talking through some of the instruments and techniques used in the strings family. So within the strings section of the orchestra, we've got 5 different instruments. We've got the violin, we've got the viola, the cello, the double bass, and then the harp, which is pretty different from the other 4, but is still very much a part of the string family. The violin and the viola both sit up on the shoulder, while the other instruments are way too big for that and very much are used while they're leaning on the floor. The strings family in general is obviously mostly used in the classical world, and in a standard orchestra they are the biggest family within the orchestra because you've got a whole big section of violins, 2 of them, you've got your violin 1s, violin 2s, a whole group of violas, a whole group of cellos and double basses, and maybe a harp or 2 in there as well. So they're a big presence in the standard orchestra setup, but beyond that as well you'll get lots of little chamber ensembles where strings are used a lot, such as string quartets or quintets, and various different groups, so they'll crop up everywhere in classical music. But beyond that as well, they get used a lot in jazz. Jazz violin is very popular, as well as folk music, pop music, musical theatre. They tend to crop up most places in Western music, and they're very versatile, which is really handy. So let me show you a little bit about the violin. This is the violin. It's the smallest of the string family. You'll see that the viola looks very much like this when I show you that one in a minute, but it's a little bit bigger. We play it up on the shoulder, like I mentioned, with the bow, which is this thing here. The bow is made of horsehair along with wood underneath. The horses don't get hurt while the bow's being made, it's just like a haircut off their tails, but it is real horsehair that's used. And the bow basically gets dragged across the strings to create tension and make the string vibrate, which creates the sound. So here you've got 4 strings. It's a G string, D string, A string, and E string. So 4 different separate notes which sound different pitches. And these all connect up along the black fingerboard here, all the way up to 4 tuning pegs up at the top, and a pretty scroll, that's what that was called, up at the top, a scroll up at the top. And the tuning pegs are what you can twist to make the sound go up or down to kind of set your tuning for the violin and make sure it's in tune before you start. To actually change the note, you just add a finger to the string you want to play. By adding a finger on to the fingerboard and onto the string that you're playing, what you're doing is you're shortening the length of the string, which means that the string vibrates faster, which in turn creates a higher pitch. So that's kind of the science behind how the notes change, but it means that as we go further up the violin, we can create quite a massive range. I'll just play you a little extract of a piece on violin so that you can hear what it sounds like. That's the basic sound of the violin. It can go a lot higher than that, but it can't go any lower than what I just played, which means that generally speaking it's used a lot for the tune or for the melody when it's playing with a bigger group of people, just because that tune can cut through quite nicely when it's up high. In terms of other things that we can do on the violin, as I've already kind of shown you a little bit, we can pluck. The proper word for that is using pizzicato, so we call this arco with the bow. And then pizzicato to pluck the strings like that. Other things you can do, as I showed you just there, is we can actually play more than one string at the same time, which is called double stopping. And not many instruments apart from the piano actually can play more than one instrument at the same time, so it's a really useful thing that the strings can actually achieve. So there's that. A couple of other fun techniques that we've got is to add vibrato to a note. So rather than just playing a note normally, if I kind of move my hand slightly while playing the note, it creates a vibrato sound, which sounds like this. So it kind of just sweetens the sound up a little bit. If you see what I mean. So there's that. As well as that, we can play around with this wooden thing here, which is called the bridge. Generally speaking, we don't play too close to the bridge, but if we do, we get some pretty cool kind of whispery sounds going on. It's called sol ponticello, ponticello being Italian for bridge. And it's quite a scratchy sound that's used quite a lot in orchestral stuff. And movie type themes as well, when you want that kind of mysterious, creepy sort of sound. On its own, it doesn't sound particularly pleasant. And the opposite of that is to play over the black bit, over the fingerboard. Which actually, it might not translate very well across video, but it creates a softer, kind of thinner sound. It's quite whispery. So you've got the two extremes. You've got like quite crunchy, quite creaky sound over by the bridge, and the further away you get from the bridge, it becomes a lot softer. And beyond that, I think that's probably, one more. We've got tremolo. So tremolo gets used a lot in orchestral music and film music as well, where you've got lots of other instruments playing, and it's used to accompany a tune. So it's where you play one note just repeatedly and basically scrub away at the violin. So if you've got a whole string section holding lots of different notes and creating a big chord, it creates a really cool shimmery effect with everyone playing. So that's the basics of the violin, and in a second I will grab my viola and show you a bit about the viola. So this is a viola. As you'll be able to see, it's really similar to the violin. It looks pretty much the same, apart from the fact that it's a bit bigger. It still sits on the shoulder, but it's a bit heavier on the shoulder, and you require slightly longer arm, slightly bigger reach for the notes down here. But for all intents and purposes, it's pretty much the same, functions in the same way. Still got our scroll, still got our tuning pegs, fingerboard, the bridge. These holes here, I didn't really explain on the violin. The F holes are what we call them. The F holes let the sound out. That's where the sound kind of escapes the body of the instrument and actually gets amplified. Just so you're aware of what those are. The main difference, and it's a really important one, between the violin and the viola is that the viola is lower. Its bigger size means that we can access lower notes than the violin can. So the top string on a viola is an A, followed by D. The third string is a G, and then we get our bottom C string. And suddenly that lower string accesses a whole new range that the violin doesn't have. It sounds a lot more like a cello down at the end, which means that composers who are writing music for the viola have the options of playing fairly high and playing fairly low. So it's really easy to just kind of slot into whatever role you want it to play, basically, which is quite nice. So I'm just going to play a little bit for you so you can hear a bit of what the viola sounds like. Aside from playing normally, it can do all the same tricks and techniques that the violin can do with its harmonics, double stopping, pizzicato, all of that. It's just got a deeper, richer sound, and can bridge that gap between the violin and the cello.
Thanks, Miss Douglas, for that. The next instrument is slightly different and a bit bigger, and it doesn't sit on your shoulder. It actually sits on the floor, on a spike at the end of the instrument. So this is the cello.
Hello, my name is Karen Stevenson and I'm number 2 cello with the Philharmonia Orchestra. I'd like to introduce you to my cello. The body of the cello is made of wood, normally maple or spruce. At the top here we have the scroll and then 4 pegs which hold in place the 4 metal strings, which are A, the highest, D, G and C, the thickest string at the bottom, and they reduce in thickness to the top string. Now these 4 strings are drawn down the cello and over the wooden bridge, and then into the tailpiece at the end. And at the bottom, we have the spike, which anchors us to the floor. We tune the strings with the 4 pegs and also with 4 tiny adjusters on the tailpiece as well. To make a sound, we can do 2 things. We can use the finger, which is plucking, or pizzicato, or we can use the bow. The bow is made of wood on the top and on the bottom horsehair, and we use this little screw here to tighten it and loosen it when we put it away at the end of a busy day. So, to make the sound, we draw the horsehair part of the bow along the string like this. We can do an attack to make it sound more exciting. We can do short notes or long notes, and everything you can imagine in between. So when we play with the bow, we set off a series of vibrations. The string vibrates, which then is transmitted through the bridge, which makes the plates vibrate on the cello and the air on the inside vibrate as well. There's a sound post which connects the top plate to the back plate, and all this air is vibrating, and then the sound comes out of the F holes here. So it's really, the body of the cello is an amplification device. So we have the 4 open strings of the cello. But that wouldn't be very interesting if we only played those. So we need to use our left hand. Now we have 5 fingers. We number them 1 to 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Like this. This is the first finger. The second finger, third, and fourth. And that is called first position as well.
And now to quite a rare instrument, like a really big violin. It's called a double bass, and not many people play the double bass, probably because it's quite big, and we tend to, if people play them at school, people have 1 instrument at school and 1 instrument at home, so they don't have to transport them between. So here's quite a funny video taken from a TED Talk of a guy talking about the double bass.
Show of hands. How many of you in the audience today know what a double bass is? Of those people, how many of you can actually describe one without saying that big thing? Already a smaller percentage of the general population. Let's make that level of refinement our goal for today. To do so, we'll start with the violin. Everybody knows what a violin is. Even if you live in a little cave, you come out now and again, and most likely you've bumped into a violin somewhere or other. You probably also know what a cello is. Maybe you even know the instrument between a violin and a cello called a viola. If you don't, however, you really shouldn't beat yourself up. Those able to differentiate a violin from either a viola or a stick mixer, for that matter, is already a rather small percentage of the general population. The double bass is the lowest of the orchestral string instruments, that being violin, viola, cello, double bass, respectively. Outside of the orchestra, basses can also be found in jazz bands, blues ensembles, combos, klezmer bands, and various other musical constellations. Within the orchestra, the bass is played bowed, either overhand, or the French hold, or underhand, or the German hold, or as the Germans themselves like to call it, the correct hold. Why those of us outside of France and Germany play the bow holds we do has more often than not to do with what our teachers played and what their teachers played, and so on and so on. By the way, in case you're wondering why the instrument is called the double bass, It is not because it is twice as big as a normal bass, which if you hang out with bass players, you know there is no such thing as a normal bass, but it is rather to signify that it plays twice as low as the cello, or that it doubles the cello line. What does this instrument sound like? At first glance, a sound we expect from a bass is something along the lines of, and that's fine and interesting, but then maybe you've also known a bass in other contexts. Maybe you've, I don't know, watched a few shark movies now and again and known. Trivia for today is a former teacher of mine actually was the bass player for Jaws. He had come back from a recording session in New York and said, "You wouldn't believe it, I got paid today to play 2 notes." Both of those contexts aren't really much more than we would expect to hear from a tuba. Now, if there's any tubists in the audience, please, I'm sorry if you take exception to this, but let's be honest. When preparing this talk, Microsoft Word didn't even recognize tubist as an actual word. But I'm thankful for the tuba, because if it weren't for the tuba, I actually wouldn't be standing here today. The biggest distinction of my youth was that of being one of the 2 fattest kids in my elementary school and high school. So the question is, what do you do with the fat kid to keep him from watching Knight Rider reruns all day? Well, you hand him a trombone, and if he gets any fatter, which I unfortunately did, then you hand him a tuba. I played both, but unfortunately practiced neither. It wasn't until I discovered the double bass at the late age of 17 that it actually interested me enough to practice it and eventually attend conservatory in New York, and then eventually decide, well, the classical music isn't narrow enough, the bass isn't narrow enough, I need to study the historic bass, which is what this instrument is, and I came here in Basel in 2004 to do so. If there's any expats in the audience, you know that after New York, the move was a bit of gastronomic masochism. The upside is that I now get to live in one of the most culturally rich and beautiful European cities, which, let's face it, is really not such a bad fate for a fat kid from the Catskills and Long Island. I do believe the sound of this instrument is much more interesting than the sound of my own voice, so I'd like to share with you one of my favorite pieces, which is from the classical period, which is from the composer Jean-Baptiste Van Hall, and both the piece and this instrument were created just about the year 1770. Thank you.
And finally, another quite rare instrument that not many people play. I think in all the time I've been teaching, we've only ever had one student who plays the harp or the concert harp. Again, probably because it's so expensive and also because it's really big to transport around. I've known people have to buy different cars to be able to fit this instrument in it so they can get it from place to place. But this is the harp.
Hi, my name is Ruth Holden, and this is my concert pedal harp. It's about 100 years old and it has 47 strings. 3/4 of the strings are made from gut and the bottom quarter are made from steel. The shorter the string, the higher the sound. The longer the string, the lower the sound. It has a range of about 6.5 octaves, which is slightly less than a piano has, but we read our music in the same way that a pianist would, with the right hand playing in the treble clef and the left hand playing in the bass clef. As a visual guide, we have different coloured strings. The red strings are Cs and the black strings are the Fs. A very important thing that a harp needs to do is to change key, and we do that rather a lot. We change key by pressing down any of the 7 pedals at the base of the instrument. Each pedal is named after one note of the scale. I've got my foot on the D pedal at the moment, and at the moment also it'll be in flat. If I press it down, it'll go into natural. If I press it down again, it goes into sharp. So it's sharpening and flattening it by a semitone each time. And how this happens is the pedals activate rods that run up the column of the harp and plates that run down the neck of the harp. And then these turn these little discs here. And I'll just show you how they work. You can see them actually turning around. So they're pinching on the strings. In harp playing, we never use our little finger. And when we play chords, you can see that our little finger would not be able to extend further down and play. It's just not long enough. So chords have to be written with 4 notes in each hand, like this. And also, when we play arpeggios, it's always runs of 4 notes. Another technique we use on the harp are harmonics. We pluck them and play them at the same time, approximately halfway up the string, and it sounds an octave above. Those harmonics are from an extract by Stravinsky in the Firebird Suite. If we're to play harmonics in the right hand, we play them in a slightly different way. We would normally position our hands halfway in the strings to get maximum resonance. But sometimes we're asked to give different effects. And one of these effects is près de la table, and it's notated as PDLT. And we place the fingers much lower near the soundboard. And you can hear that it makes a guitar-like sound and a drier sound. Another effect we can use is by using our nails to pluck the string. And that gives it a more metallic kind of sound. You could do the nail near to the soundboard, which totally alters the sound of the note.
So that's the orchestral string family. 5 instruments in total. And a lot of people do tend to ask me, where's the guitar? Obviously the guitar is such a common instrument, but it isn't officially a member of the orchestral family. And the reason for that is the acoustic guitar is so quiet, you would never hear it in an orchestra. So we will be looking at some of these other instruments in the coming weeks. But hope you've enjoyed watching about the strings. And of course, if you're interested in learning a string instrument when we get back to school, just let me know.